Hello YouTube, it's Alan here with Alaria TCG. Thanks for checking out my channel again today. So today we're going to be going over the how to play Alaria TCG found in our Alaria TCG Rulebook that was just created. And to do this, I figured I'd just show the pages that are in the Rulebook. This way you can hear me explain it and you can pause to read it as well if you have any questions. So you don't have to get the rule book, but if you want an actual physical copy, they will be up on the Game Crafter once I get everything published, so you can get the booster packs or the booster packs and the rule book, as well as dice as well, which you'll end up seeing later on. It'll explain kind of why you need them. But yeah, if you have any questions or you want me to clarify anything, please make a note in the comments below. This will be the official video, and I'm planning on just doing this all together in one. Should be fairly simple. The mechanics are kind of designed as familiar tabletop RPGs, for example, like Pathfinder, Dungeons & Dragons, if any of you guys have ever played it. The gameplay mechanics you'll find are somewhat similar to those. They may be a little different, but the idea is going to be the same. So that's something you can kind of wrap your head around as we go through this, so you get a better feel for how the game is played. All right, now the rulebook goes over, the first page is a quick access rules, so if you want to get a quick refresher after you already know how to play. So we'll bypass that, and we'll also bypass this table of contents here. This will show you where you can navigate in the rulebook to find answers to your questions. All right, now let's take a quick look at the gameplay overview. As a player, you'll have 5 summons in your hand, and you're going to be utilizing 3 d20 dice. One's going to be used for power, which you accrue in the game, which we'll go over. One will be used for your summons as health, and one is going to be your attack dice, where you use to attack, cast spells, and roll for different effects. The purpose of the game is to be able to defeat all 5 of your opponent's summons. If you do so, you win the game. If your summons gets defeated, or you don't have enough power to play any of your summons and you're stuck, you also lose the game. All right, so we're going to go over some card anatomy. There's going to be 3 different types of cards in Alaria TCG. There's going to be your summons cards, there's going to be spells, and there's going to be equipment cards. Now, as far as the summons go, you're going to notice on this image there are different parts of the card anatomy, and we're going to go over those real quick. And these are going to be fairly similar to the other cards as well, but there might be a couple differences that we want to go over today. All right, now starting at number 1, the top right number is going to be the cost that's required to be able to even play the summons. And this is going to be pulled out of your power dice. So throughout the gameplay, and again, we will go over this here in a little bit, but as you accrue power, you will use that power and drop your dice down the number of costs for different things. In the case of summons, if a summons costs at least 1 power or more, you're going to be dropping your power dice that number. So you want to be able to make sure you play your power dice effectively, and you don't want to just use all your power, because if you die again, if you can't play your summons, you lose the game. As far as number 2, you're going to see your card description. This card description is going to have different abilities. Once you successfully attack and you pass through your opponent's summons' defenses, you will then have access to play one of your summons abilities. You play this ability by paying their power cost. The power cost is simply the number that is in the parentheses next to the ability you want to play, and you negate that number from your power die, thus activating the summons ability. So there will be 4 letters that you'll see on cards. You'll see an M, which signifies a melee type ability, C, which stands for cast, which means a cast type ability, E signifies it's an effect, and R signifies retaliate. It's a retaliation ability, and what that does is that's an effect that you play in response to something, usually something your opponent does, and it will be described on the card how the retaliate effects works. But for example, if your opponent's summon successfully attacks you and they roll an ability roll, you have the ability to roll a retaliation ability as described on the card, and you can retaliate doing some form of effect. Now, in some cases, you may see a letter in a parentheses without a number. That means that there's no roll that's required. So that's simply how it works. Now, in the case of this Novice Arcanist, you'll see 4 different types of abilities. As far as the M, C, and R, all those things, again, those just describe what type of ability it is, and those don't affect anything in any way, shape, or form unless there is a card that has an ability that does affect those kinds of attacks. So for example, if you have an effect or some spell or an equipment that says melee attacks get dropped down by 1, for example, that means anything that is preceded by an M, if it deals damage, is going to be lessened by 1. So fairly simple. In the case of Novice Arcanist, that Staff Thrust is a melee attack. It deals 2 damage originally, but if you had that kind of ability that affected melee attacks, that simply means that she would deal 1 damage. This will not, as you note, will affect her C abilities. Those are cast type abilities. Those remain unaffected. So that's kind of how it works, and that adds a lot of variety and different kinds of strategies you can play in the game. Number 3 is the flavor text for each card. Cards that have this flavor text give you a little bit more insight of what's going on in the story during this initiation set. So for those of you who like flavor text, this is something you'll definitely want to read. For number 4, on the bottom left is your melee cast score, and on the bottom right is your defense evade score. These are used when you're attacking and defending. For your melee cast score, this is used when you're battling with an opponent's summons. When you make your initial attack roll, whatever number is in your melee cast score, that's what you're going to add to your attack roll. Your defense evade score, the number on the right, is the number you're going to add when you're defending. If you choose to defend against an opponent's summons, you're going to make a defense roll, and that's the number you're going to add for that. And there may be a defense score or an evade score, but either way, they'll both be added to your defense. And just like the descriptions, whether it says melee or cast, for your melee cast score, it doesn't matter unless it gets affected by some other ability, spell, or equipment. Just know that the number on the bottom left is what you add to your attack roll when you attack. The bottom right is what you add to your defense when you make your defense roll. All right, now on to spell cards. As you'll notice, the anatomy of a spell card is very similar. You have your power cost at the top right, your description, your flavor text, and and you got your power score and your rarity, but there's a couple differences that I want to go over. The first thing is to make mention in the descriptions of the cards, you're not really going to see any letter preceding the number in the parentheses because it's a spell. You're not really doing a type of attack ability. One of the other differences you'll see as well is in the description, number 2, right above the description, you're going to see 3 different types of words. You may see the word cast, counter, or continuous. A cast spell is a type of spell that you can play on your turn. A counter spell is a spell that you can play on either your turn or your opponent's turn. A continuous spell is a spell which is played and is continuous in effect even after your turn is over. Now, counter spells have something a little different than the other spells. At the bottom left and at the bottom right, you will see the choice of 4 different kinds of words. You can see summons, spells, equipment, or effects. Or you may see that it's blank and devoid of any words at all. What this means is this explains how the counter spell can be used. Not all counter spells can be used at any time. They must be triggered in response to something. So in the case where it says summons, that means that the counter spell can be triggered and then you can play it in response to a summons attacking you. If it says spells, you may play the counterspell in response to a spell being played. If it says equipment, it may be played in response to an equipment being played. And then effects means you can play the spell in response to an effect, which is indicated by an ability with E in the parentheses of a card. Some spells may have 2 different words on them, and that means that it can be used in response to either one of those words that it qualifies for. So for example, if at the bottom left of the card it says summons and at the bottom right it says spells, it means you can use that counter spells in response to a summons attacking you, or if a spell is played. If both spots are left blank, then that means that the spell can be played at any time on your opponent's turn or in response to an action they take during your turn. So here's an example of the spell Shocking Retaliation. It tells you that it's a lightning spell, and the type of spell is that it's a bolt spell. You notice a counter spell, and you'll see at the bottom left and bottom right it says summons. This means that this card can be played in response to a summons attacking your summons. Now, as far as equipment cards go, we won't really go over them too much. They play the same as the other cards do. They have their cost, their power, their description, and flavor text, and it shows their rarity. Other than that, there's nothing else that's unique about them that we need to go over today. Now, as far as the playing field goes, you might ask yourself, how does the playing field work? Where do I place all of my spells? Well, it's fairly simple. The playing field has 8 zones. You have your attack zone, which is where you place your summons. Your spellbook zone, this is where you place your spellbook. Your spellbook is your deck. And you have 2 spell slots. These slots are used to play spells. When a spell is played, it uses up one of those spell slots for the turn. In the case of a continuous spell, the continuous spell will take up one of those spell slots, which means as long as the continuous spell is there, you will only be able to have one other spell slot you can play for a spell. There will be 2 equipment slots. This is where you can play up to 2 equipment cards. There will also be a graveyard zone, which is where you will place spells that have been successfully cast or summons that have been defeated. And there will be an exile zone. So whenever a card is exiled through means of an effect, that is where those cards will go. This image here shows you a layout of how the game is played. Note, you do not have to follow this layout exactly. This is just to give you an idea of where you can place your cards when you're playing the game. All right, now that we've gone over card anatomy and have talked about the playing field and how the cards work, let's talk about how do you actually play the game. So when you begin the battle, you first decide who will go first, and then you keep going in turn until the turn goes back to the first player. That constitutes a round. The players will start off with 5 of their summons. Their summons do not go into their spellbook or deck. They will start off with them in their hand. Now, a turn consists of 3 phases. You have your beginning phase, your attack phase, and your end phase. During your turn at your beginning phase, you will increase your power die by 3, and you may acquire up to 20 points max. Once you reach 20, you're no longer allowed to acquire power until you use those points when playing the game. It is important to note that the player who starts the game just for their first turn will only acquire 2 power points. After that, they will continue to acquire 3 the rest of their turns. After you accrue your power points, if you still have cards in your spell book, you will draw a card if you do not already have 3 spells or equipment cards in your hand. It is also important to note that the beginning phase is where you play your summons, and you may also play spells if you are able to. After your beginning phase, you may take an attack phase. If you choose to battle with your summons, you will declare an attack by rolling your attack die, and you will make what's called an attack roll. And as mentioned before, this is where you will add your summons melee or cast score as needed, and the defender may choose to defend. If they do so by rolling a die and making a defense roll, adding their summons defense and evade score as needed. If your attack roll is lower than the defense roll, you fail your attack. Also, if your attack roll equals their defense roll, then the tie goes to the defender and you will also fail your attack. Now, if your attack roll exceeds your opponent's defense roll, then you succeed on your attack. At this point, you can play one of your summons ability. You can only play one, and you need to pay its power cost. To pay its power cost, all you need to do is see whatever number it requires for power and negate that from your power die. Note that you do not need to play a summons ability if you don't want to. Once you finish your attack phase, you enter your end phase. This is where you complete any of your actions, you can cast any spells or use any equipment abilities as needed, and then you end your turn. Always remember, you may play spells, equipments, and/or equipment abilities at any time during your turn as you are able, so long as you succeed on their ability rolls as they apply, or by paying the necessary power costs. After successfully casting a spell by playing a spell ability, the spell goes into the graveyard. You can choose not to use an ability, and if you choose to do this, the spell instead goes to the bottom of your spell book. Failing to cast a spell also sends the spell at the bottom of the spell book. Failing a spell means you fail to roll an ability roll which qualifies for any of the spell abilities. Now, one of the unique mechanics of Alaria TCG is that during your turn, you are limited to only 3 actions you can take. Actions include playing a spell, playing an equipment, summons, or spell ability, attacking with your summons, or sacrificing spells or equipments or summons to increase your power. And note that paying the cost to play a summons and put it on the field does not count as an action. Also note that your opponent on your turn has 2 actions they can take. They can do one type of action once. They can apply a retaliation effect, they can play a counterspell, or they can play an equipment that allows them to make a response to something you do on your turn. Now let's talk about the power dice and how to increase your power, because again, power is used to play the costs for playing summons, spells, and equipment. One of the ways, as mentioned before, is you will always increase at the beginning of your turn your power die by 2 points. You may also increase your power whenever you defeat an opponent's summons. You gain that power equal to their summon's power score. Sometimes, however, you may feel yourself needing more power points to play cards. You can gain power through what's called sacrificing. This means that cards you sacrifice go into the graveyard, and you will gain power equal to that card's power score. There's a few ways you can sacrifice cards. You may sacrifice spells from your hand, equipment from your hand, your spells in play on the field, your equipments in play on the field, or summons from your hand. You may not sacrifice summons that are in play though. Note, it is important to mention, however, that if you sacrifice a summons from your hand, it can be very risky because again, you will only have 5 summons, and once your summons are all defeated or put in the graveyard, then you lose the match. Also remember that you can have a max of 20 power points on your power die. So be careful when you're sacrificing cards that would give you a lot of power, but you only gain a few of them because you've maxed out. So use your power points wisely and play your cards well. Now the last thing to talk about here are the deck rules, or the spellbook rules. A spellbook can have anywhere between 10 to 20 spells or equipments. A player must have exactly 5 summons. Players may have a max of 4 copies of a common card, 3 copies of an uncommon card, 2 copies of a rare card, and 1 copy of a legendary card. The nice thing with Alaria TCG is that a booster pack is already deck ready. You can already play just with 1 booster pack. So it's a little bit different, and unlike other games which require anywhere from 36 to 60 cards, for example, the nice thing with Alaria TCG is that the gameplay mechanics, because they are a little bit different and unique to other TCGs, is that you only need 18 cards to be able to play. Thank you so much for watching my How to Play Alaria TCG video. If you have any questions, comments, or would like me to clarify anything, let me know in the comments below. I would love to get back with you on that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and were able to see some brand new, fresh mechanics for a TCG game. I really spent a lot of time trying to design it to really make it fun and replayable, and to make sure that no battle is ever the same. So I hope you were able to see that. Like I said, let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to answer them for you. Follow us on our Instagram at Alaria TCG. And please subscribe if you have not already. And stay tuned, because here in a little bit I will be publishing the game on the Game Crafter, and it will also have the official rulebook as well, so you can have a physical copy of that, or you can watch this video. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time.